Good afternoon and welcome to this session of the NATS Virtual National Conference. My name is Alan Henderson. I'm the Executive Director of NATS, and I'm pleased to both introduce and moderate this panel today, our Agents and Critics panel. I'm excited about this hour we will spend together talking with our three panelists. I want to remind you that you can note questions that you might have as you listen to this session and the YouTube chat box, and those will be ported over by our assistants so that we can answer them during this session. I also want to thank you for making NATS, the virtual conference, part of your professional development activities this year. So please join me in welcoming our panelists, Kathy Olson, who is founder of Encompass Arts, Romana Jaroff, who is a vice president at IMG Artists, and Anne Midgett. Anne, until recently, was the chief classical music critic for the Washington Post and is now an independent writer, author, and all-round Renaissance woman. Welcome to all three of you. We're so grateful that you're here today. And although I would like to surmise, and I may be totally wrong, that each of the three of you have gravitated to the careers you have gravitated to because you like to be behind the scenes a little bit and maybe not up front. But I really think it's important for our audience, both the student audiences and the teacher audiences, to just hear a bit about your paths to where you are today, where you started, how you moved through your career in different places, and how you ended up to where you are today. Because I think it's so fascinating for us all to understand where our careers might take us, especially those in the arts, and really opening their minds to the diversity of opportunities there are for those who are in music and other arts in the broader career sphere and the broader community that is kind of the performing arts infrastructure and that industry. So why don't we start with Romana?
Hello, everyone. I'm Romana, and I often just identify myself as IMG Artists, largely because I've been there for over 20 years, which seems impossible to me, but it is true. My career started as an undergraduate because I had this incredible opportunity to support a residency between a university in California and Darmstadt, which completely fell into my lap. And I found myself booking hotels and planning for visiting artists from Europe in a very short time frame. And I absolutely loved every minute of it. And I ended up working for an orchestra for a period of time, went through a very complicated bankruptcy with that orchestra. It was the San Diego Symphony many, many years ago. I ended up being picked up by a rock promoter and booking tours for very popular rock bands in California and not really knowing what I was doing, but loving every minute of it. And through the course of a number of contacts that I made in all of those experiences, I ended up realizing, you know what, if I don't move to New York, I'm never going to do that. And I did. And I had a number of really great opportunities, and I landed at IMG Artists. And here I am. And my education background is I was a singer. I studied at the University of Venice in Italy, both contemporary music history, and I went to the Conservatory in Castelfranco, which is about 45 minutes north of Venice.
Great. Anne, how about you?
Well, I wanted to be a writer forever. Since I was very, very young, I wanted to be a writer. And when I was a teenager, I fell hard in love with opera, sort of passionately unwittingly in love with opera. My arts until then had been writing in the visual arts. My father was a painter, and I studied classical civilizations at college, which is ancient Greek, thinking it was a good thing for a writer. I saw my love for opera as being purely personal. I had no idea even how to deepen that love except by learning opera and listening to opera. I always sang in choruses. The idea that I would myself sing opera was not something that was on my radar because I was going to be a writer. So after college, I wanted to live in Europe and be a writer. I had incredibly naive ideals. I graduated very young from college. And I moved to Germany, thinking that there would be opera there and I would learn the language and I would write a great American novel, not even understanding what role Germany played in the lives of American opera singers at that time. I fell in very quickly with a lot of American opera singers, and still as a writer, although it did dawn on me that perhaps I could write about opera and combine my two loves. But I wrote to Opera News with a great deal of enthusiasm, and Opera News ignored my email, and I thought, okay, forget that idea. And another 5 years went on, during which I was writing my novel and having all kinds of adventures with various opera singers. Read into that whatever you will. And I did begin studying singing at a point. I was 24 when I started studying opera singing, so there was no sense in which I went to Germany to become an opera singer. It was more like, I'm so involved with opera, I might as well try to find a way to make it part of my own life rather than just sit on the coattails of all my friends who were opera singers. Then I began, one thing led to another. My novel went in the garbage for a while, and I began editing an English language magazine and writing quite a bit about the arts, but thinking that being a critic was somehow crossing a divide I didn't want to cross because I was on the side of the artists. My family were artists, my friends were artists, and critics, as we know, are bad, evil people who make artists cry. As I know very well. But I began writing for Opera News, bought an article of mine from this little magazine I was editing, and then they assigned another article, and I'm writing all these feature articles, and then they called me into their office when I was in New York, and they said, we're going to make you our critic for Germany and Austria. And I said, oh, I can't be a critic. I said, I don't have the background, I don't have the drive, and I don't have the desire. I'm not a critic, I'm pro-artist. And they said, you'll learn. And they assigned me to cover the world premiere of Karlheinz Stockhausen's Dienstag from the Lichtcycle. And that was my first ever review of any kind. And it was printed in Opera News. And I had a panic attack in Leipzig Opera House before I wrote that thing. And that's how I began as a critic. And through meeting other critics, I gradually realized that criticism doesn't have to be bad, although I know many people think that I have been very bad and they're very mean to singers in my career, but it's about writing your view and about translating what you see into words for the public. It is a form of writing. And I also firmly believe that it's not my job to tell you what to think. It's my job to tell you what I think and have you tell me what you think. The role of a critic is to help stimulate discussion, not ordain what must be thought, or be an arbiter of good and bad. It's kind of an odd line I walk because, of course, people are going to perceive you the way they perceive you. Anyway, I moved back to New York. I was going to finally quit journalism and go back to writing my novel. The New York Times called as I was on the threshold of doing that. And I thought, well, if the New York Times called, I better do that for a year. And a year became 7. I was a freelancer at the New York Times. I was never on staff. I was paid what freelancers are paid. And then an opportunity came to go to the Washington Post, and I thought, well, I better take that. And I did that for 11 years. And there I was a staffer, and I was the chief classical music critic at the Washington Post. And I reached a point where I had kind of done that. It was just time to move on. And it was really fortunate that I was able to move on. And now I am actually writing that darn novel. So it's been a long journey back to where I started, but I have no regrets at all. It's been really fabulous what I've been able to do in the platforms I've had and to have such a privileged position to watch this field.
Great. Kathy.
Hey there. Well, I was not a singer like Romana and Anne, because everybody that I've ever coached on this can attest to that I was never a singer. But I was a pianist and played many zillions of auditions in New York City for years. And during those auditions, we quite often would get asked, who do you like? Who do you think could sing this role? And singers never really understand how they get a job, but I remember playing an entire day of auditions for Turandot, and the singers all, the Lius came in abundance, all singing beautifully. And the presenter called me that evening at home and said, okay, who do we like? And he actually hired the person that I said, well, she just did it. She has great reviews. So that's kind of how I snuck in the back door of being an artist manager. The pianist in the room is always the trusted person for the musical values. So that's kind of how I became an artist manager. I got into TV film part of this through the back door as well, because I started to manage Anthony LaTura. Anthony was called in by Martin Scorsese to do an audition for Boardwalk Empire. And believe it or not, he booked a series regular on television, which if you have friends in the film TV world, that's like winning the lotto on your first time that you go and scratch the card. It never, ever happens. So that's how I got into that aspect of the business. And, I still hide behind the piano. I wish there was a piano today, because I'd feel much more comfortable coaching a singer and being in the live aspect of our life. It meant so much to me what Romana said. Love hearing a concert, or love hearing, the live music. That's what feeds us. Our first kiss that we see on stage in the opera business, we're all going to go crazy, because, we've just missed the touch. We've missed that visceral part of our business. And, so far live streaming hasn't made it in that way that I think, that does. So off my soapbox, that's my story, I guess, in summa, like they say in the opera world.
That's great. Well, I personally, I've worked with Romana for many years and helping us, bring successful artists to Nats events. She's been a wonderful partner to work with on things that we've done. I've personally always devoured Anne's criticism over the years and appreciated her depth, not only in the criticism area, but of course, more recently in the broader sphere of writing and reporting on various things in our industry. And Kathy, I really have gotten to know over the years. Some of my students are represented by her, and also she's a Knoxvillian. So it was another reason I wanted her to be on this panel, is because she is from and where we were going to have our conference. So it's just great to have all three of you here. And of course, we have lots of current day issues that we can talk about today that resonate with all three of your careers and the things that we are dealing with. So why don't we start with the COVID situation and how that, just is impacting your daily work, and how it has impacted your work with artists, of course, bridging that gap between management, artists, how we are dealing with, how we've dealt with compensation, and how that has been a very tricky slope to manage. Who wants to go first?
Well, I think for me, the way I've been looking at it, once I started to be able to breathe again, it was that we are all builders and we don't like to dismantle. So I think in this first phase, it was this incredible, frenetic phase of dismantling, mostly to get our artists home as they were spread all around the world and stuck in places, unfortunately seeing, illness and death. And so I think once we started to get back a little bit, feeling the sense that we were building by getting them where they needed to be, then the reality hit of what I called the cancellation shuffle, which was just cancel, 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 wait, reschedule, 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 cancel, 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 reschedule again. So I think we've all just dealt with that. And in between, of course, talking to our artists who haven't been on a stage since probably March 10th, and what that means. And I'll pause there.
Mm-hmm. Kathy? Yeah.
Well, everything Romana said is so true. And we had actually 3 artists that were on cruise ships, and that was a nightmare, because at least the Disney cruise ship put people on a beautiful Disney island so they could be there for a month and be in quarantine and then get home. But the opera people, it was another challenge. I mean, LaTanya Moore was doing Tosca in France, and they really didn't know if that was last performance was going to happen or how they were going to get her home. And you know, the beauty of what's gone on during this, and I'm sure Romana sees this too, all of the artist managers all over the world have now united. We meet every Tuesday at 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time in the States, and 4 or 5 or whatever it is in Europe. And we talk and we share ideas and we share solutions, which I've done this now for 15 years. We never did that ever before. It's unprecedented. So we're at least all of the smaller managements like mine and Romana's a large corporate one, we're all starting to share thoughts and ideas and, you know, talk to each other. And I just don't think we ever did that before. And on Friday, we had an hour meeting with AGMA. And if people listening are AGMA artists, get involved with your union. It is your union. And, you know, they sent out a questionnaire. Fill out the questionnaire because it'll see what your needs are as an artist. And you're right. I mean, once we got everybody home, that was like, phew, everybody's home. And then every job got canceled, and some are getting canceled into the new year. And some companies are canceling productions in 2021 and calling it force majeure. And I'm not an attorney, but force majeure is not in 2021 so far. So we're all dealing with these big challenges, but we have begun to take care of each other a little bit more in the opera business. And, you know, that plus my gardening and taking care of my dogs have kind of seen me through this kind of dark time, and reaching out to our clients, even though they have no jobs, and just seeing how their families are doing and how they're doing. I mean, that's kind of all we can do at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, it's been interesting from my perspective because I made this huge life change in November, and I was prepared to not be working and to be working on my book, and it was going to be a different time, but I wasn't prepared for the entire field also not to be working. It was very excessive of everybody to come along with me on this adventure. From my point of view as a critic, of course, I'm on the outside of the business. I'm not seeing the inside parts. And it's incredibly painful to watch, you know, all these talented people out of work, people wondering if they can ever afford to go back. However, on a systemic side, it is a huge opportunity. Just the amount of creativity that's been unleashed from individuals. Some of the YouTube streams, I mean, Ryan McKinney was doing these wonderful, like, joint opera presentations. They did the first scene of Rheingold, calling it Corona Dameron, with Jamie Barton as Fricka and Ryan McKinney as Wotan. It's great. It's a serious production of Wagner. It could be done. It was really wonderful. Seeing individuals take heart, seeing everybody be rested and able to think of creative ideas, those are good things. Also, I feel like the large institutions that we are dominated by in this field are not serving the field as well as they could artistically. And that's a tricky thing to say because they are the economic underpinning of this field. Everybody has been making their money based on the fact that these institutions are there. But they've needed rejiggering for a long time. And for a long time, I've been hearing from my readers that all the good new opera is actually happening at the smaller institutions and the offbeat ones, and who even goes to the Met and the big ones anymore. And I find that really telling. And I see this, as painful as it is, as a huge opportunity to do a kind of house cleaning that we've needed to do in this field for a long time. There are so many talented singers who are artists of a far deeper magnitude than they get to demonstrate by going into a Tosca in role X with X director and X conductor. It's become a little bit formulaic, and art is not a formulaic thing. So I hope that this time of extreme improvisation is going to open the doors for more opportunity. It's not going to be an easy economic time, and people could say easy for you to say sitting at home watching it all. I know how much pain is out there, but I know that even some of those who are suffering worst are resiliently figuring out things that they can do, be it porch concerts, be it videos, be it thinking about new kinds of company that could evolve after this as we start to emerge from this. One thing that's true is these tiny little shut down audiences that people in Europe are beginning to perform for are a way to rediscover the intimacy of opera, which in this country we've lost tremendously. Because when you're sitting in a 4,000 seat house, at the back of it, those little bitty figures on stage don't have the literal physical resonance with you that is one of the powers of opera. And I hope that some of these smaller recitals with 50 people, with 100 people, economically not sustainable in this country where we don't have subsidies, but that they can help people to discover what we're also excited about in this field, the kind of thrill of the human voice and the human voice on that scale. Of course, digitally, it's very hard to get that, but I am optimistic that there will be some new opportunities coming out of this.
Yeah, you all bring up a really important point a little bit about some of the changes that I think we might see in the industry as a result. I know, I'm sure you all are talking about contract language, and Kathy mentions the force majeure and how it seems like contracts have been obviously, in many people's opinions, stacked on the side of the opera companies or the institution versus the artist in many respects. And I know there's a lot of conversations in AGMA and some other places, and independently from AGMA as well, and in the artist community, about these, advocating for these changes. What do you all hope happens out of this on the artist side, and how we can provide, better protections for artists and their income? Let's start.
I hope that artists are able to make a living. I mean, I made a living as a freelancer for years, and then I got a job as a member of a large institution, and it's much, much easier. I always talked about the golden handcuffs of finally getting that job. It really is rough to be a freelancer. On the other hand, I think realistically what we're looking at, I mean, opera singers are all freelancers anyway, as we know. There are very few steady jobs in this country. There are no steady jobs for opera singers. But I hope that there's a way to find an economic basis to sustain a kind of creativity, whatever that means. Small companies, traveling troupes, it's going to be a lot more, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, rediscovering the audience on your own. But those are all skills that singers have that in a lot of cases are not developed. I know the Victory Hall Opera in Charlottesville, Virginia was founded by a bunch of singers who were growing frustrated at feeling like cogs in the machine and not having enough say in their own artistic destinies. And that was a few years ago. That was before the COVID shutdown. They're still there. And I would love that to be a model for some people. I think it is.
I think there's much more opportunity in this time for the artists to work on the art that they've been wanting to learn, that they haven't had a chance to. And I also think that we really did quickly get to this bigger, better, faster, more stage while trying to make the classical arts in particular a more commercial, or at least fall into more commercial models. And this was this incredibly unfortunate but necessary pause for people to regroup a bit and go back to it's a distillation of what they've wanted to do, where they want to go. And there really is a little bit more opportunity for slower strategic planning. I also think the timeframes of our planning are changing dramatically, because we've now all had a taste of what it is to work within 6 days rather than 6 years. And I have always felt that our field requires an incredible amount of buoyancy on our side, certainly, to allow for the creative buoyancy on the artistic side. And it's very easy to get stuck into these patterns of the cycles in which we have to make the business occur. And this has kind of helped us to see, actually, no, I can get this done in 2 phone calls, not 2,000 emails, and I can get this done in 6 days rather than 6 months or a year. And I have found that to be incredibly freeing. The difficult part is that I think we are not, I've been looking at this period as the phases of grief day in, day out, and we're not all in the same phase at the same moment. So you try very hard to hope that you're in a build phase and that you're in the quick, efficient spot, and that the artist also is, and that the presenter, the producer, the partner, the commissioner is as well. So it's really a giant juggling, which I frankly think we wouldn't be doing this if we didn't like to juggle in that way. So at least there's some comfort in that.
If I could throw in on that, what Kathy was saying before about the kinds of conversations that were going on, I think that's happening in all fields, and it's really exciting that people are beginning to talk. And I hope that's a habit because that could have a huge change and effect on the field. If people, even orchestras are talking to opera companies, different agencies of different sizes, this is incredibly productive for us as a field and for all the performing arts as a field. May it continue,
Yeah.
It's been great to have 60 or 70 people on a Tuesday morning Zoom, and none of us could have done that a few months ago because everyone's just simply not available. But I mean, for me, it's intriguing. I probably deal with more
different agencies of different sizes. This is incredibly productive for us as a field.
Yeah. I mean, I deal with probably smaller companies than Romana does, but I mean, someplace like Opera Omaha, immediately when this happened, they wrote us emails as managers and said, we're going to pay your clients their full fees. We're going to also ask 2 availabilities for next year, and we're going to do the time slot that all of the artists are available. Now, that was amazing to me because Opera Omaha is not a large company and not a large budget. Now, many of you know that the large companies, the big 5, or however you like to talk about them in the United States, Romana's shaking her head. That did not happen. So it's been amazing to me that the smaller places found a way to protect the artists, because many of these companies are run by artists. They're former singers or they're former they're our breed, they're our people, and they see how hard it is that they're going to have to go on unemployment or Medicare or whatever it is because they have no work. So they're just more sympathetic to the needs of us, and we're all here because we love the art form.
Mm-hmm.
In fairness, of course, the big companies don't have a huge overhead. If the Met was going to pay every single person's salary, they would go bankrupt. I'm not defending the way the Met has handled this for 1 second, but it is true that a company that only has 4 productions a year can better afford to do that than a company that has 16 productions a year.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, we are getting percentages. I mean, I feel like I'm on Let's Make a Deal most days, because are you going to give you 25%? Or are they going to give us 30%? Most of the companies are attempting a good faith, agreement with us. Most of them are. And I'm sure the Met is doing their best. I'm sure Washington Opera is doing their best. Everybody's just trying to get through this and have a company at the other end. But a lot of the smaller companies have really come through, and we have to, like the song says, she's got a little list. Well, we as artist managers have a little list, and we will not forget the people that have taken care of the artists at the end of all this.
And I have found too, the little companies, Opera Omaha, I love that you mentioned them, because we had the same experience, and we work with large and small companies. We're delighted to work with anyone who's in the classical sector, certainly in the others as well. But I think some of these tried and true chamber music presenters also, who also do have a vocal component to their programming, were the first to step forward and say immediately, first, how are you? We value you as agents too. Let's have a conversation, and how are the artists? And then we would just like to make a gesture. We'll reschedule as soon as we possibly can. And I even think that the idea that they came to us with it is really the great place. And we didn't start negotiating percentages on companies here. Even in Europe, which would be the first, they would immediately think to do that because of the contractual reason. But we didn't start to get offers of that. It took a lot of, I think, this coalition of managers talking and retalking and visiting and sending pretty clear emails about where we thought things needed to go. And I think we've made great progress. And I think, again, the togetherness has been exceptional.
I agree.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. My other friends who are in the agent side of our business that I correspond with, many of them themselves have positively said, corroborated exactly what Kathy said about, the fact that this brought all of this piece of our industry together in a seemingly very, kind of competitive, environment. It's a lot less competitive than than it's made out to be, I think, in the public side of things. But I think that aspect is so important, I think, for the future of our industry, that and I'm certainly hopeful that will continue. I think certainly just the artist side of things, the fact that they've probably taken a little more agency themselves, also about, okay, how am I going to come through this? How, I can't just rely on my agent to bring me the next round of offers right now, and maybe never, who knows, and it's created a sense in many ways of these sub-communities kind of really coming together. And I think I certainly have seen that in the voice teacher community and the students of singing community, and the ways that we've interacted and the ways that I personally, in my position, have interacted with different parts of our industry. It's really been exciting to have some of the conversations that we have had that I guess we really have just been too busy to take the time to have in the past. And we get so busy in our own little world, in our own little silos. I would like to just shift just a moment to giving some advice to those who are listening, for those who might aspire to career paths that you have chosen. And you've both mentioned your various paths to where you are today, and you might talk about some of the skills that you learned that were so valuable to you, and maybe your advice to those who might want to enter what you are doing.
I was extremely fortunate to have some fabulous role models in before IMG, but really in IMG. Edna Landau, Catherine Endicott, Alison Pybus, within our company, Elizabeth Sobel, certainly, Lorna Hazelwood, who was with us for a period of time. They're all still in the business, which is great. But I think that it was always this need for excellence in everything that you do, and to try to remember to answer the questions before they're asked. And I think that for me was one of the things that has always driven me as a human. And I think that's an essential quality, to be able to think ahead of what's coming down the pike, to be able to anticipate the challenges that others are going to face, and try and create a space around them so that they can do what they want to do, what they love to do. In terms of advice, I think it's a human evolution to come to a place where you know yourself, or you continue to learn to know yourself. And for me, paying attention to the cues of those around you, and find a way to see where they're finding comfort in what you're doing is a quality that's necessary. And honesty, integrity are the skills that I would always look for in colleagues, and buoyancy, flexibility, efficiency.
Good. Kathy?
Sorry, I'm unmuting myself. Great. I love what Romana said, because it's so true. We do surround ourselves with excellence. That's kind of the credo of every business. And we need to be honest, particularly now in this time. All singers they're tough people, because, they stand on stage and in a hot costume, they sing High Seas. They're a tough stock. If you tell them the truth, it has the ring of truth in it. And, when I got my start in New York, and before I started coaching and really working in the city at all, I knew Warren Jones. And Warren Jones gave me the best career advice anyone's ever given me. And we speak the same language, because he's from North Carolina and I'm from Tennessee. And he sat me down after he cooked dinner for me, and he said, "Kathy, you just have to learn while you earn." And hopefully I've learned while I earned all these years, because I learn something every day from the clients. I don't teach them anything, but I learn from them. They're amazing teachers and collaborators. And this walk, and I'm sure Romana feels the same, it's a stroll and it's a walk together. It's not a race. It's not a run. We collaborate. They don't work for us. We don't work for them. We see the good in them, what they really can do, and we push that, of course, and we try to never make them feel uncomfortable with a role or with a project. But it's a walk in career. It's the career walk. It's not a sprint. It's not a race. And the greatest clients, the ones you've had for so many multiple years that you've seen them grow, and you're at their Met debut, and you've watched them just come up, you know, from seedlings turning into these beautiful sunflowers. And that's the thrill of being a manager. You help create something that was just not there before.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, my path is different, and I would have said before this COVID shutdown that my path is not one to emulate, because newspapers are obviously, newspaper criticism is in trouble. However, the Washington Post replaced me when I left. There are still about 10 or 12 people out there doing this full time, and there's a huge market for people writing about the art in articulate ways. I think criticism is going through an evolution. It needs informed voices. There are going to be different kinds of outlets for it. We were in a time of transition before COVID, of figuring out ways of talking about the art form, but the world needs informed voices talking about the art form. The world needs a lot of perspectives about it. When, as I said, I was very ambivalent about becoming a critic at all. And I was studying voice still. I studied voice for about 10 years very seriously, although I never auditioned for anything. I was never at risk of actually becoming a singer. But I was in a voice studio when the New York Times called me. And I remember a close friend of mine who was a singer saying to me something that echoed with me. She said, "Anne, you've got to be honest. The field needs an honest voice out there who knows something about singing," which perhaps is a terrible thing, because I tried to be very honest. And as we all know, you wouldn't be that. If I was this honest with my husband, I would be divorced years ago. It's not a way to make friends and influence people. However, I believe that tough love from critics is the best way the field can survive, because I'm not writing for the artists, I'm writing for the audience. There's a lot of parallels between my career and a singer's career. I mentioned being a freelancer before. I would hop from gig to gig, and you would have that sort of thrill of the chase, trying to get a better gig here and a better gig there. And I worked my way up to the biggest gigs. But also you're writing for the general public, although artists read you. And I feel strongly that if you see something you think is mediocre and you overpraise it, the audience will stop trusting you, because you don't want somebody going to something and feeling it's mediocre and saying, "Oh, but the critic said it's good, so I guess I don't like opera because I didn't think it was very good." What you want, and I've had many readers write me this, like, I hadn't been to much opera and I didn't like it that much, and then I read your review and I thought, hey, I must have a pretty good judgment if I didn't like it that much. I'm going to go again. And that's actually what you want. You want to develop a relationship in people with this medium. As horrible as it is for the artist who I said was mediocre, there's a big karmic thing about being a critic that I never quite came to terms with. But I do believe that honesty is essential. And it's also, my job has been a lot of fun for me in some of the ways that being a singer is fun, as I said, and sort of that thrill of the chase and seeing what you can get, and seeing different things all the time, and getting to meet some of the most important people in the business. I've gotten to talk to such wonderful artists over the years. It's a huge gift. And these days it's also possible to be a practicing artist and write about the field. The lines are blurring as the field changes. So anybody out there who's watching, who has any kind of a knack for writing, think about developing that voice and see where you can take it.
Great advice. I was going to fill in a question from one of our audience members, which seems to be relevant to what we're talking about here. And they say, I teach a number of mid-career, 30 to 35 age singers who had momentum, were regularly engaged, and then, of course, everything went silent. They fear a 2 to 3 year wait to regain the momentum. What do you think, and what do you advise?
Well, I feel I have that same thought at least once every minute or so during this time. I think what I am finding, I completely agree with what Anne said earlier about the opportunity, and what I am finding comfort from is the ongoing commissioning and new work discussions that are happening, and particularly in the chamber music areas. And I use chamber music kind of to describe project-based work. So anything that might have several different elements for it. I certainly spend a lot of my time doing that, and I'm enjoying it very much at this stage. It's a different kind of work, but I think that there are going to be some opportunities for those who are able to to have the flexibility to look at new repertoire, new ways of collaborating, and with the idea of a slightly different configuration, either on stage or in the audience, that it's going to be for a period of time, because we all know that choral music during this time is just going to take longer than anything else to come back because of the medical realities. So I think I really do feel that the commissioning is going to continue to have a brighter breadth and more excitement to it. And I also think it's a bit easier to fundraise for in some ways. I don't want to say it's easy, but it does it's a little bit more nimble. And I think that there's going to be some great opportunity there.
Great. Kathy, you want to weigh in on that?
Sure. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with everything Romana says, but I also think a 30 to 35-year-old artist is primed to go right back to work, because people are looking for the tried and true. They're looking for experienced artists. You know, I judge Met auditions. I've judged 3 times this year, and I'm sure Romana does too, and Anne probably as well. And you know, you hear these great talents, but a lot of them are like, you know, little puppies. They're so cute till they pee on the floor, and you go, oh, they were just so adorable till they pee on the floor. You know, they have the talent. And a 30, 35-year-old singer, that's prime of your voice and prime of your experience and prime of your life. I mean, this would be a true casualty for me if these people stopped in the business, because they're going to be needed, and artists in their 40s and artists in their 50s are going to be needed now, because they're going to hire who they know and trust when the world comes back. They're not going to take a lot of chance and a lot of financial risk on a very young person. It's just not going to happen. So stay in the game, stay with it.
Mm-hmm.
This is an interesting question, though, because in our field, let's face it, 35 has been a kind of effective cutoff. And I didn't fully realize this for a long time, but as the young artist programs proliferated, it was kind of like, if you haven't really gotten established by 35, maybe you better look into selling real estate or something, because the cutoff has gotten younger and younger. There's been less of a market for those talented 40-year-olds because a lot of the bit parts are taken up by the young artists. It would be great if this crisis makes people, as Kathy very credibly says, turn to the tried and true, because suddenly you don't have the young artist programs that have been up and running the same way. And you do need somebody who you can just put in on stage. It would be great if the business began delving into those with more experience, because it's become in the last 10, 15 years, a very disposable kind of business. We chew you up in our young artist programs. We use you for as long as we can. You get a little bit of traction. And if you can't really take off, well, then you go off and we'll get the next generation of young artists. And we've seen a lot of casualties in the 40-year-old artists who have a lot to say and a lot to share and a lot of valuable experience. And maybe we can keep them in the picture more now. Maybe this will enable a longer shelf life for our artists. It would be great.
That's a great perspective. Your professions are often seen as kind of the group in the group labeled the gatekeepers. And so those who decide, kind of who doesn't get to be a star or have a role in this field. What are your what are your views on that aspect in your respective profession? I think it's a really thought-provoking topic.
Well, I can say that I used to think critics shouldn't overinflate their own importance. The myth that a critic can make or break a career is a myth. However, you don't want to be disingenuous about what you can do either. As a woman in this field, and I was the first woman ever to review classical music for the New York Times on a regular basis, which was ridiculous because it was 2001. I shouldn't have been the first woman to do anything by then. But there was a lot of pushback attached to that. And I felt very much the need to prove myself by not going too far out of the lines, color in the lines and try to follow along, because just by virtue of being who I was way outside the lines, and I got a lot of pushback, and I didn't even know what I was doing that was so wrong. My point being that once I got more established, and it took me quite a few years to figure it out, I thought, wait a minute, we don't want to be coloring in those lines. Like, I do have a platform and I have a little bit of an ability at least to say, hey, where are the women? Where are the Black people? Where are the Latino people? Like, we need more diversity. We need more of this. We need to be looking at these issues. And, you know, this kind of thing came increasingly to define my career as I went on. It's only shocking that it took me so long to apply my everyday values to the professional sphere in that way. But it made me think a lot, because we think of gatekeepers as being Peter Dell, you know, the Metropolitan Opera, the big companies, but all of us with roles in this business have the power to open those gates a little bit wider if we can. And it's something I took increasingly seriously as my career developed.
Kathy? Oh, we lost you.
And here we go. Okay. I loved what Ann said, because there were significant gatekeepers when I started in the business. And I really don't think there are anymore. I think it's a much more level playing field. You know, when I first started in the business, there were a couple of impresarios and a couple of critics as well that could kind of make you or break you. You know, oh, if you didn't get that great review in the New York Times, your show was going to close. Like, we all waited when I did Bohem on Broadway for Ben Brantley to say, your show is great, you know, you're gonna stay open, and we did for a year. But now I don't think there really are those impresarios, that one or two people that have the power to cast everything and do everything. I think it's much more a level playing field than it used to be, and I think that's great. I don't think there should be really gatekeepers. You know, everybody should have a key to that gate, no matter what color you are or what ethnicity you are. You should all be invited to the party. You know, it should be an inclusive art form.
But the reality is, one of the reasons that Ben Brantley's reviews or any classical music review in the New York Times no longer has that power is that the field is not as important in the eyes of the world. Our field, the gravitational pull of our field has shrunk a little bit. So there's not, the prize behind the gates is not as starry. So in that sense, the gates have opened a little wider. But on the other hand, I think that to pretend that we've reached a point of equality for singers of color, or, I mean, female artists maybe more so, but there's a long way to go till we really have those gates open to singers of color as they should be. And those discussions are ongoing and still very painful. So in that sense, the gates still need a little widening there, I think.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think excellence, I think we go back to the excellence point too. We are all dedicated to excellence, and we try to also hopefully be as excellent as we can. And so it really, in a moment where there are artistic choices, there are people, we are finding wonderful access to people from all over the world with talent and the drive and the ability. I'm a little concerned, because I do think that the national boundaries are going to change, which is going to impact quite a bit. I think we're going to be looking at a nationalistic approach to casting in many ways, because we have to. We're just going to, and I think we're going to have a little less flexibility with flights and whatever quarantine challenges we have. So I'm sad about that, because I think that the reality of this time and geography, we're becoming something that we could get anyone anywhere to do a gig tomorrow in Moscow if you needed to. And now it's like, no, I can hopefully get you to Peoria in 6 months, and I hope. So I think unfortunately, I think that's going to pull us back a little bit on the ability to broaden our ability to offer people to the stages.
But there's a silver lining to that too. If you think of Alfredo Kraus, who always took a couple of days when he got to town before he sang. And, you know, today it's the norm that you jet in and you sing there, and then you sing there during the rehearsal time, and you come back. And maybe it's good for everybody to have a little more grounding and a little more connection with the production and with the place they're in, and not be pushing their voices so hard. That's not all bad.
Can I comment on that? I have one more comment. It is not all bad. And I also think that the artists are going to have even more opportunity to have a broader audience locally. because, opera, you go and you sit somewhere for 2 months, which is, or longer or shorter, but, concerts, you go for 3 days, recital, you go for 1, sometimes 24 hours. And the companies are requiring all of these other wonderful activities of participation, education, and outreach, and development, and cultivation, and all these other areas. And now perhaps with this little bit extra time, rather than the 2 days off between concerts that I book, maybe we'll have 3, and I completely agree with that. And then I think the great opportunities for outreach, both to coming students, to populations that don't attend performances regularly, it's a better partnership with the artist and the presenter, because the artist isn't just kind of the figurehead, they actually can get involved. So I agree with you completely. That's a great point.
Yeah. Well, Anne alluded to her history of being the first female critic at the New York Times, arts critic at the New York Times. And in many ways, historically, certainly Kathy and Romana, the agency business was very male dominated for many, many, many years. I'd like for each of you to speak a little bit about the barriers you faced when you entered and how you see things have changed.
I really didn't feel that. I mean, I know my colleagues say, it's a man's world, but I felt like I was so embraced by every man in the profession. I mean, from Matt Horner to Bob Lombardo to people that have done this so many more years and so much more brilliantly than I really felt like if I needed them, I could call them on their cell phones and talk to them about anything. I've never really felt that a man in my little portion of this prevented me from doing anything in our industry. I think people are very giving and very kind to colleagues as artist managers, and even more so now because we're closer. I've seen a lot of people's kitchen now on Zoom, so I feel like we're just old buddies. But I do feel like there's a closeness now we've never had, but I never really felt that I was, Gloria Steinem and what I had to do, and I had to trailblaze this, this industry, because I've always felt accepted really as a woman, because many brilliant women came before me, Nellie Walters and all these older ladies in management that just forged the way for us. So that has not been my journey. That has not been my walk in this. It hasn't seemed to matter.
I can say I've definitely experienced it. I've been in, it's about 30 years for me. So I will say that part of it also has been my own evolution, that I have a voice in the room. And I think when you grow up in a company and you grow up in a field, and I feel that I was really lucky to work with top level marquee artists almost from day one. So while that allowed me to be in rooms that I otherwise may have taken a little bit more time to get into, it did take me time to find my voice. I'm finding my voice again now, as a parent and as a human, as a woman. And but really, it was me standing and saying, no, actually, I do have a voice. And one of the things I'm really working on now, which has always been part of the business, it's part of this balance of power and self-effacing, that to keep yourself not in a threatening or not in a forceful position, because you are not the talent. And you are not on stage. So it's this really interesting juxtaposition of power and authority, but with I use the word gentleness. I mean, people can have different approaches, but I have to be very mindful that I'm speaking my truth when I do that, and I share that with my younger female colleagues, because if it's not authentically who you are, it's going to erode you over time. So I'm just going to say now, and I do have a phrase that I'm going to say, and I hope it's not controversial, but I do find myself, particularly now where every day I'm doing something I've never done before, more than any other time in my career, which is fabulous and frightening. But I do often stop and say, what would a man do? And I think there will be a day maybe when I don't have to do that. So I look forward to that.
My version of that is, oh God, give me the confidence of a mediocre white man. But you know, I had fabulous male mentors as well. I had really wonderful men who were incredibly supportive. Not until I began really writing about Me Too did I realize how incredibly fortunate I was that not one of those relationships went south on me in the way that many women did experience in this field, certainly in classical music. But I came to the New York Times because the Times was embarrassed about never having had a woman. So they were only considering women for my freelance slot. It wasn't even a hiring, but they were looking at 3 women and I got it. So I was an affirmative action child. And you know, being a woman, I mean, I'd say, oh, you know, it's excellent and I might have gotten it anyway. But the fact is that being a woman had this huge effect on my career. I think the whole way that I was able to impact the field to the degree that I was able to impact the field has to do with my being a woman, has to do with my being a different kind of voice. And it's made me think a lot about how blithely we just say, oh, cream will rise to the top and whatever. But you actually need to carve out places for those who are not already welcomed at the table. I also saw this at the Washington Post. When I got to the Post was the most desegregated place I'd worked. That is, there were maybe 15% of my colleagues were African American or people of color, as opposed to 5%. I didn't know the actual figures at the Times, but the Post had made a real effort to cultivate people outside of the white male Ivy League, whatever template it is. And it made a difference. And the Post does that less now, and that makes a difference too. If you want to represent the world properly in a world that's been dominated by white men, you have to take an extra step and you have to recognize that you have to take that step. And it's not enough to say, oh, it will all even out, because there are subtle things in place to ensure that it doesn't. And just remembering the kind of pushback I got as a woman, I could post for you all a review I wrote in 2001 where somebody at the time said, well, you're not quite ready for this kind of big review yet. We'll give you a little more time. And I looked at that review in the intervening 19 years so many times and I thought, what the heck was wrong with that review? There really is nothing wrong with that review. It was something colored by the fact that I was a woman bringing this perspective to it. I can't tell what else was wrong with that review. So I think it does matter. I think that we have to work hard to get representation. And I think the fact that all of us are women here is not so self-evident as we wish it were.
This has been a wonderfully stimulating conversation, and I'm sorry we have to end it because we could go on for quite a while. And I really am grateful to Kathy, Ann, and Romana for joining us today and giving us the perspectives that they have. It's just been so wonderful to have your perspectives, and we thank you so much for the work that you have done and continue to do in our industry. And we wish you all the best during these times, and look forward to a great return to all the good things we have to look forward to. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.